I'd like to welcome you to what I hope will be a really extraordinary session. I want to start by, on behalf of the Film Festival, thanking our sponsor, ACFC West. So if there's anybody from ACFC West, thank you for allowing this event to happen. Before we get started, who here in the room is an editor? Oh, excellent. Who here are directors? And keep your hand up if you're a director and you edit your own work. Isn't that interesting? So we've got a room full of directors and editors. Most excellent. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to Kate Amanda. I want to start by saying, as a director, I think I am at my happiest when I'm at the side of a good editor. And it's been a real privilege in my life to have been in that situation a lot. But you can perhaps imagine how much of a pleasure it's been in the last 24 hours to spend time with Kate Amanda, and you'll find out why. Kate is the editor of not one, but 2 Academy Award documentary features, Into the Arms of Strangers and The Long Way Home, both of which were directed by the same director, which I think is really interesting. Kate has worked with Mark Harris over and over again, and I think this is a real sign of a smart director knowing when he's onto a good thing. She also edited a 3rd Oscar-nominated short documentary on Tiptoe, Gentle Steps to Freedom. In 2005, she won the Outstanding Achievement Award in Editing, given out by the International Documentary Association. Last year at VIFF, no less than 3 films edited by Kate were in the festival. Perhaps you saw them: Crazy Wisdom, First Position, and One Lucky Elephant. Her most recent work, Ina May Gaskin and the Farm Midwives, won the Audience Award at the 2012 LA International Film Festival. She's been and continues to be an advisor at the Sundance Institute Editing Lab since June 2004. She's appeared on panels for the Sundance Festival, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, the IDA, the International Documentary Association, and American Cinema Editors. She's been a juror at the 2006 Sundance Film Festival for the International Documentary Competition. And she's also served as a mentor at the National Association of Latino Producers. She's on the faculty. Oh, and I should also say, I found out last night that she's part of a committee which makes up the rules or tries to improve the rules of the Academy Awards documentary section. So she's a very, very good person to know. She's on the faculty of the School of Cinema Arts at the University of Southern California and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And she's featured in First Cut, which is a book which has just been put out by Gabrielle Oldman. Catch that. And apparently there are a number of documentary editors featured in interviews in this book. So it's with a great deal of pleasure that I would like to, all of us in the room, to welcome to Vancouver and to this session, Kate Amanda. Actually, just before you launch in, one of the things I thought we'd do is, just in terms of a format, if it's all right with you, Kate has clips that she would like to show and speak around, but both of us would really like this session to be really driven by you and your questions. I've got lots of them, but it would be really interesting to hear what you want to hear from this extraordinary editor. So that will be the format of the next hour.
Mm-hmm.
And with, I thought I would just kick off, if that's okay.
Okay.
And that's that in the description on the web, there were a few assumptions that Kate, I think, can kick right out of the ballpark. One of them is that this session was going to be given by a man, so that's easily dismissed. The other is that on the website that that B-roll would save the day. And last night over dinner, Kate said to me,
I can't stand. B-roll, soundbite, and talking heads. And I try never to use those words. I tell my students, try not to say the word B-roll too often. We know what we mean, but I always like to think in terms of that these are cinematic images. These are storytelling tools. They're visuals. And B-roll just seems to sort of make it a throwaway or sort of a secondary element of the filmmaking process, and I don't think it is at all. I think every visual can be used to further the story and to create a dramatic element. So, and talking heads is also another one, because I really feel like these are not talking heads, these are people who have opened up to share their lives with the director and with the audience. And I think it's important to honor that and respect that. The other little thing in the description was something about no-fail tips, and I'm sorry. I can't promise any no-fail tips. It's a process of trying everything, and there's going to be failure along the way. But I think editing is problem solving, and in the end, we hopefully have solved all our problems and created a finished product that can go out into the world. But I don't have any no-fail tips, I'm sorry.
right on. So we could, perhaps the working a title could be, there's no such thing as B-roll. We can take it from there. Where do you want to start?
Well,
should we start with Into the Arm?
should we
Do you want to show a clip?
Show a clip? We could do that. I think it might be a way to just jump in and sort of open up conversation. And I chose Into the Arms of Strangers because it is a film that won the Academy Award, for one thing, and it's a director that I love working with, Jonathan Harris. But also the scene that I've chosen is kind of the set piece, the centerpiece of the story, because the Kindertransport was a rescue mission that took place before World War II started in 1937 through 39 in Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Austria. And it was an effort, a joint effort between the British government and the Quakers and various Jewish organizations to rescue children from Nazi-occupied Europe. And it was a program where parents actually applied, and their children were accepted to go into foster homes. And 10,000 children escaped Nazi Germany in World War II, the concentration camps, the death camps, because their parents were willing to send them away. Often with the idea, no one knew what was going to happen in 37, but with the idea that we'll save our children, and then we'll try to get out ourselves. And it was very hard to get visas and so forth. So anyway, this is the moment in the film where the parents and children are actually saying goodbye to each other. And there's no archival footage of this event. For one thing, photographers were not allowed, cameras were not allowed. The Germans didn't want anyone knowing what was going on. And So the entire story was created editorially through photographs, archival footage, and these extraordinary interviews.
So the challenge here is, what do you do when there's 0 images? But there was a clear narrative through line,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but not a cinematic one at that point.
We had great stories being recounted by the interviews, and we also had a wonderful composer, Lee Holdridge, and sound designer, Gary Rydstrom.
Now, they weren't in on, when did they come into the process?
That was after the scene was cut. I mean, I used temp music and temp sound to edit the scene.
And I just want to, I have quotes here from various different people, and I think that it's the sign of a really good editor when you look, when Kate won one of her many awards, various different people were chiming in and saying how wonderful she was. And it's very interesting when you have somebody, Miriam Cutler, who's a composer, saying she has a great sense of how to marry image and music to tell stories in a beautiful way. I know that when I'm scoring a film that Kate has edited, the temp score she assembles will be a strong indication of what she and the director are looking for in the music. And I think, you know, having an editor who really has an ear for strong, not just music, but sound design is a blissful thing. So we're lined up. This is the clip that's already lined up, John. Thanks so much. If you can roll on it. Do we have to move for this?
Although a few children travel by plane, the majority departed by train. Some trains left during the day, many others in the dead of night. Each child was given a number. My number, and I still have it, was 152. And this was a number that every child put around its neck, and a similar number was attached to our suitcases. And there we stood in our groups of 50, I think it was. And there was my mother and my father. And my mother kept up a conversation with me as if this was an ordinary and interesting and thing that was happening. But I remember that she wore a pony fur with a fox color, and her face was inside the fox color. And I remember that although her speech was as if everything was ordinary, her face, I remember, was hot. It was red and hot.
Every parent promised their child, we will soon come and follow. How otherwise did the parents get the little children onto the trains? Give us a few weeks when things, either they'll blow over and you come back again, or we will come and join you. That was a promise every parent made to their child.
There came the time to say to the parents, listen, you cannot go to the platform. The police will not allow it. You have to say goodbye here. So I ascended the chair there, addressed the people. Where I took the courage to do that, I don't know. But I told the parents, now it's your last goodbye.
They didn't want the German public to know what was going on because they had experiences of parents weeping and fainting at the platform. So we had to say goodbye. Groups had to say goodbye in an anteroom, and the scenes were pretty horrendous.
When my sister and brother left, all the other parents were crying bitterly, and I was so afraid. I didn't want my mother to cry because she was a very strong person, and I thought if she cries, then terrible things will happen. And I kept on looking at her and I said, don't cry, you won't cry. And she didn't.
I got to the station, which was crowded with people. All the children had their parents with them, and I was sitting there all by myself. they were standing there with a suitcase. There was nobody's shoulder I could cry on. All I know is I was going away. I was going to England. Whatever would happen, would happen.
My father, every day he said, Pupila, I don't want you to go, but I want you to go because it'll be good for you. The day came and we went. My mother and dad went with me inside the train and with my suitcase up. My seat was right at the window, and the German trains had great big windows, and my father pulled that all the way down so I could be leaning out of the window and he'd hug me and kiss me. And I could see my father's face getting wider and wider, and I thought, I only hope nothing is going to happen to my father, because he looked so terribly, terribly pale, and my poor mother was getting worse and worse, and I couldn't wait for the train to go because I didn't want to remember that. And the guy came and he waved the signal, and the train started to go. My father says, Pupila, let me hold your hands. And I held my hands and I said, I have to let go, I have to let go. No, 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 I don't want you to go, I don't want you to go. And we were already, my father couldn't walk very fast because he walked in a cane, and we went already a little bit and a little bit more. And he took me by my hands and he pulled me out of the window. And I fell. I could have fallen in between the platform and the train was like about that much of a space. I didn't, but I got hurt and I was bleeding, and I was devastated, absolutely devastated. And my father was in seventh heaven, that he had his little Pupila, his little girl back. The parting was terrible. That's the one thing I've never forgotten in all my life. And she had been so controlled. She'd always been a sort of solid support to us. And suddenly she showed her feelings. And it was terrifying, really terrifying. And you saw this face which showed all the hurt and agony she'd been through. And I can still see my father that meal time, but I would have liked to have had a happier image of my mother. That's the only image of this contorted face full of agony. It's very sad. And I remember standing by the window and waving goodbye and just trying very hard to believe that we really will come back, that it won't be for very long. That when the train moved and they disappeared from sight, Austria and I cried to each other. My parents ran along the train on the platform, and I still remember it sort of in my head. I heard that refrain, you're leaving, you're leaving, you're leaving. And I watched their faces, and tears were streaming down their face, down their cheeks. And I knew then, these people really love me. This is why they're sending me away. And I immediately started to write to my parents, and I apologized for what I had said to them, that they were trying to get rid of me. In no time, the suitcase was gone, the child was gone, the other children were gone, just emptiness. And we turned around and went home. I did not talk. It was awful.
The children went with the hope that the parents would follow, or that one day they would come back and they would see them again. did not realize, and I could never realize, that only a year and a half later, from the same railway station, trains would go in the other directions to Hitler's slaughterhouses.
I need the lights, if it's at all possible, to come up a little bit more in the theater. Oh, here they come. Good. So one thing that struck me in watching that was the choice to build the scene around that horrible moment when kids see their parents break. Yeah. Who was that your choice or Mark's, or how did that, what was the story behind building this scene?
It was probably a combination of both. The way Mark and I worked together is that he would give me pages with the interview segments that in a certain order. And so I think probably it was his original impulse, but I'm free to play with that a little bit and to modify it and work with it. But I think it was a combination of both of us.
Building that together.
Yeah.
Is there any questions out there before we, yeah.
This film was 1999, I think it premiered. It was actually, the interviews were shot in Super 16, and it's a 35 millimeter final print that it was cut on the Avid. And I actually want to clarify one thing. The opening sequence where you do see children and parents waving and getting on an airplane, that actually was one of the first transports that was on an airplane. So that was a real original kinder transport, and it was the only one that was filmed. So that was basically it. There is footage at the end where they, when they arrived in England, there was actually a news crew awaiting them. So there was footage of the children arriving, and the woman who holds up her number, I actually found her in the Pathé newsreel and slowed it down frame by frame and read 152 on there. We all got goosebumps over that. Yeah.
Is there anybody else who wants to talk about? Yes, over here.
So we saw footage of kids, lined up and waiting with their suitcases. Where did that footage come from? And did you decide how the scene needed to be crafted and then go looking for that stuff, or were you given resources and then decided how to pull it all together?
We had an excellent researcher, Corinne Collette, who her assignment was to find footage of children, footage of trains, anything from that period. And all the people who had photographs gave us their photographs. The one woman who discusses seeing remembering the last image of her mother as being contorted in pain, that photograph is the only thing that she has left of her mother. So that was the only image we had for her story. But I tried to use sort of generic abstract train footage. And there's one shot of a bunch of boys lined up, and that was an orphanage, and they did have a photograph. So, and then once they actually got on the train, and then they took the ship to Harwich, there were some photographers that were there.
There's somebody else who had their camera here.
Mhm.
Sure, and then,
Are you able to tell us what the ratio of archive footage was to the amount you were able to source and the amount you used in the end?
I can't give you it was probably about 100 to 1. And yeah, and we had access to the Bundesarchiv and Imperial War Museum, plus all the, you know, I don't know, Corinne was able to get footage from Czechoslovakia and France, and I can't tell you what the absolute ratio was. It was a while ago.
And I think one of the things that's interesting too is just, and I'll ask this for every film that we take a look at, but how long were you in the edit suite for, just in terms of the cut, never mind post-production and the but in terms of the main cut, how long would an archival film like this take?
This took about 6 months from once we started. Well, the actual shooting took place over a couple of weeks, and it was very controlled. So for each, there were, I think, 12 people interviewed, and 2 of them, unfortunately, didn't make it into the final film. And Corinne, we were constantly, as I was cutting scenes, I would ask Corinne for footage that I needed. For example, I needed a hospital in France in 1944, and she'd find it, you know. So yeah, I think it was about 6 months from beginning to end.
And what kind of a relationship are you having with the director at this point? How do you choose a director? I mean, I think good editors choose their directors. It's not the other way around.
Well, this was actually our 3rd film, maybe 4th film together, and we had
By this point you'd done 4? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So there was no question about who was.
So the first time.
Yeah. We met each other on a film that I was an assistant editor, and years later, when I was editing, Mark had a film, and he hired me to cut it, and we had such a great time working together. We had really very simpatico. We would look at a cut, and we'd have the same notes, you know, we almost complete each other's sentences. So it was wonderful to work together. And he was actually, I mean, the way I like to work is to talk about a scene together and then have the director go away, and then I'll work on it for 3-4 days or something like that, and then show it. And this one, the first cut I showed him, he couldn't speak. So that was good. It remained pretty much the same it's almost the way it was the first pass.
So you're one of those directors who likes the director to leave the room. You don't want us in there.
Well, not when I like the director to be there, like when we're recutting, when we're refining, and when we're fine-tuning, and, you know, really getting down to the end. But when I'm cutting a scene and really sort of trying to figure it out, to me it's like writing or composing music or painting or something. It isn't a joint collaborative effort the way I like to work. I mean, I really like to, I mean, it's like like I say, it's problem solving, but to me it's very creative, and it's a kind of, I get into a space where I just want to be thinking through everything, trying things, playing it for myself over and over and over again, and having it as perfect as I can make it before I show it to anybody else.
And then, of course, that leaves the director in the position of being able to come back with some kind of a fresh eye, even if it's only 4 days away, right? Yeah.
Well, and also my friend Victor, who's a wonderful editor, he says the editor's job is to surprise the director. So hopefully directors like surprises. But then I have a friend, Lynn Littman, who's a director, and when I talked about that way of working with her, she says, "Oh, you mean then I have to come into the room and respond to your cut and worry about hurting your feelings?" And I said, maybe you should find somebody else to work. Well, we're great friends, but we've actually never cut together other than like a little promo for something, you know. But she loves being in the room, sitting right there, you know, shot by shot, practically.
Are there any other questions
Yeah.
This isn't an editing question.
Okay.
What happened to the woman who got pulled out of the train?
That's a whole movie in itself. She actually went through 4 concentration camps with her parents. And she and her father survived. Their mother didn't. And then in the end, when this was filmed, she was living in Philadelphia. And she did bring her father. I think she brought her father to America with her. But her story was absolutely devastating.
And
Yeah.
is it in the movie?
Mm-hmm.
Because
It
that
is.
becomes one of the challenges with something like this. You set up a whole bunch of
Yes.
characters, you do it in a really compelling way. So you and everybody else is going, holy toot, what happened to her?
Mhm.
Then you have to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We wrapped up everybody's story. Yes, and I think there were 10 finally in the end of the film.
So this scene falls at what minute mark in your film?
This is about halfway through the film, and the film and the film is, I think it's 100 minutes. So yeah, there's a lot of preliminary story before this happens.
How did you describe it, this scene?
A set piece.
What did you mean by that?
Well, it's the essence of the story is, to me, or the heart of the story is parents willing to send their children away because they love them and to save them. And so to me, this is the moment where all those stories come together, and where the meaning of that has to be expressed, and you have to feel it and realize what these people are really going through.
So would it be correct to say that this was the scene that you're building up to, and it's in a drama?
Mm-hmm.
You call it the set piece, or it's the incident that sets everything else afterwards? Is it the centerpiece of the? It can't be your ultimate film beat in your film, but it's the seminal
It's pretty
scene.
crucial to the story. But then they all make it to England, and we follow what happens to each one of them in England. And of course, one of the things that they are charged with is try to help get your family out. So every one of them has some sort of story about trying to rescue their parents, and some actually did, and some didn't.
Just before we go on to exploring another film, I have a final question on this I want to ask you, but is there anybody else? And please, while we're doing this, hold up your hand and I'll interrupt what I'm saying for you. Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering, I was noticing a lot of camera movement, zooms in on the eyes and, cutting away and coming back to zoom out on the eyes. Does the director just hand you the footage? He's already photographed them with zooms in and camera movement, or do you have some input into that?
On the stills and the archival, I pretty much designed all of that myself. Mark would just suggest images, and yeah, I did the moves in the Avid, and then we had somebody, for all the photographs, we had them, well, it was an optical printer back then, but we had someone do the moves, and we would design the moves together, but I did the temp moves in the Avid, and the slow-mo of the archival footage. Yeah, I created all of that. And then I also had a system where I had an assistant who, she set up a camera, and sometimes I would have her just photograph the photographs for me and do more elaborate moves on them that I would use for temp. And we also created some sort of abstract images at my house, like the packing there's one wonderful poignant scene where they all discuss what they could bring with them, what they could take out. And they were only allowed one suitcase. And we didn't have anything to go with that, so my assistant and I just sort of mocked up a packing. I had an old suitcase, and I had an old teddy bear, and we did, hands packing, and we made it sepia and slowed it down. And then eventually that was used we got a real camera person to recreate that. But yeah, I just had to invent things as I was going along.
You're directing.
I know. Fortunately, Mark's a good sport about that, so he was happy to have me doing it.
But that's fantastic to have a working relationship where that can happen. Do you ever get to the point where you just kind of wish the editor would just go away and stay away, and you could just direct the whole thing?
No.
Director, rather?
No, I have no interest in directing, really.
But you are directing in that moment.
Well, I'm creating visual imagery. I mean, I think that's, in something like this, you know, they did shoot visuals in Germany and England, and we used some of that. And they also shot out a train in Germany, recreating the route, and also they shot on the boat trip out the portholes, and then that was all material that we manipulated. So I was just sort of following in that tradition, suggesting more things that they could shoot, which then were all reshot.
Yes.
Kate, I was just wondering, how do you approach, obviously when you make documentaries, there's no set script that you are working on, and so the film is really born in the editing room. And so when you're working with Mark, how much of the script is already, like, does he do a paper? You mentioned that he gives you notes of the sequence of interviews that he wants in a certain order.
Yeah.
How much of the film is actually planned from beginning, middle to end, and do you go through sort of, you know, the conflict is here, and like when you were editing this, did you know what was going to be before and what was going to be after?
We had a pretty clear idea because it was a historical film, and we knew where the story began and how it ended up. We did have a clear progression, and Mark is also a writer, a fiction writer as well. So he had a pretty elaborate, involved treatment of the story points told through the interviews.
So in a way, the interviews are giving you your paper edit, aren't they?
That's right.
So it's kind of an interesting segue into your next proposed clip.
Okay.
Because you're pulling, this will really answer Kat's question, because it's a very, very different conundrum that you have to solve. Are you comfortable with setting that up?
Showing thin?
Yeah, why don't
Yeah.
you set it up, and
Sure,
we can take a look
okay.
at it.
All right. You'll think that I only work on sad, depressing films. But in fact, I had a student once say, "Are all documentaries depressing?" But this was a film directed by Lauren Greenfield. Any of you are familiar with her work. She most recently has a film called Queen of Versailles that's out, that's playing theatrically right now. This was her first film. And Lauren's a very well-known photographer, and she had done a photo shoot. Her most famous book is Girl Culture, I think it's called. And she, if I can summarize quickly, she was interested in images of, in our culture, of women and what women do to themselves in certain ways, this ideal of beauty, and beyond that. She filmed at a clinic for eating disorders. That's where she did her photo shoot, and then she went back and revisited it as a documentary film, and it was on HBO. It also was in some festivals, but it's a study of women with eating disorders. And this clinic is supposedly one of the best in the country, Renfrew Clinic, and Lauren had amazing access to it, and she, for the first shoot, was there for 6 weeks and shot day and night. And in the end, we had about 450 hours of footage, and occasionally there were 2 cameras, but she had access to one-on-one therapy sessions, group therapy sessions, and extracurricular activities that went on. She gained the trust of all these girls. And this is a key scene towards the end of the film. One of the issues in the film is that there's all the resistance to treatment, and in this case, the young girl Brittany, who's the center of this scene, is 14 years old. Her parents have put her into this clinic. She doesn't particularly want to be there, and so she gets in trouble all the time, and she's about to be kicked out, and her insurance company is no longer going to pay for treatment. So this is the scene where the community is saying goodbye to Brittany.
Okay, and John knows where the clip ends?
No, he does, yes.
I don't feel comfortable with you leaving because I don't feel like you're ready. I'm actually scared to death for you. And that's something that's not really easy to say because as much as I want you to do good, and I really, really do
Any questions right off the top there? Anybody want to take it? I'm just going to take my cell phone out here. I had a terrifying thought it was going to go off. Yeah, Kat.
Kate, with something like that, with when you're editing something 450 hours, I mean, how do you not get overwhelmed and bogged down by the amount of footage that you have?
That's a very good question, because at first I just started cutting in order. I just started day one and cutting every scene that seemed significant. Day two, day three, and then I realized that this could take a year to go through. And because literally a lot of it was so good and it was so interesting, and really strong verite footage, shot beautifully by Amanda Michelli. And so then I realized, okay, we had identified 4 main characters at that point. We actually had identified 6. So then we kind of made more of a plan. But the original idea was just to go through and cut every scene and see how it played. So there's a lot of DVD extras on this film. But you know, in the end, I think the first 6 weeks they really got the story. And then the hardest part was Act 3, was kind of wrapping up the stories. Most of the drama happened in this first 6 weeks of shooting, and this was towards the end, and another major character also left or was kicked out, and that was a big part of the drama. And then the drama was over, and 2 main characters kind of settled in and took recovery seriously and went through the program, and one was successful, one was not so successful. But that was less interesting than the group dynamics that were going on, and the ones that were really struggling. And so we ended up focusing on that. But I do have to say I did a lot of exploring of who were the strongest characters. And like I say, there were at least 2 that were dropped. And there were some scenes that I really loved that never made it into the film. And also maybe because they were redundant, that it felt similar to another scene, and you only could hit that note once, for example.
So you also have the added conundrum from the sounds of it that when people were messing up, they're interesting, and when they get in the straight and narrow, it gets kind of boring. So
it's true.
In terms of a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, did this mean that the first half was that you just had to close it down quickly after what really is the first half of your story?
Yes, we did. I mean, I think our first rough cut was 4 hours long. And the last 2 hours were not as interesting as the first 2 hours. Yeah, and so we actually sort of had to collapse time and almost like come back like 2 months later, that kind of thing, and then see the characters. And in something like this, you can actually see a physical change too. So that was helpful because you could actually see that they looked healthier when we returned to them. Although we might not have seen the absolute process that they had gone through, we knew what the program was all about. We set up the program very clearly, so hopefully the audience understood that they succeeded.
But that eliminates the ability to cut back and forth as well if people are getting chubbier and chubbier.
Yes. No, we had to stick to the actual linear structure of the shooting.
Well, I remember when we were cutting a film here, Fix, the story of Addicted City, our main character was going on and off of drugs, and we followed him in and out of treatment, but in the end, we only had enough footage really to have one trip to the treatment center and one back. If you take a look at it really carefully, you see his hair is getting longer and shorter and longer and shorter. Is this something?
That's true.
Are those cheats allowed in your editing room?
If you can get away with them, yeah. Hair is a big issue, I think. Especially if something's shot over a period of time. People's hair changes, it grows, it changes colors. But I cut a film years ago about a man undergoing the procedure of having a sex change. And in that film, there was no way we could ever go back because his looks kept evolving and evolving and evolving. So we absolutely stuck to the actual progression. And sometimes you can get away with it. It just sort of depends on how important time is, I think.
So I guess there's also, yeah, we have 5 minutes? Are you serious? Wow.
Well.
Yeah, right in the back.
I was recently filming a documentary, and the producer was using the word B-roll a lot, and the characters were, well, what's A-roll?
That's great.
I just wanted to ask about your editorial decision to keep that camera move in when you went over to the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it had created a sense of really engaging the viewer, where we're often very fearful to leave those camera moves in and would stay on the character and then use the voiceover before. Anyways, your decision.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because back in the old days when people shot on 16 millimeter, the moves were inevitably much smoother. And Amanda was really great at getting to what was happening. And sometimes the moves just weren't that smooth. But I wanted to keep I thought it was more valuable to keep the moment happening, keep it flowing, and not feel like it was being cut. And so much of the scene was in close-ups. At least that one, I thought, gave you a little bit of sense of the room, that there was a therapist there and where she was in relation to Brittany.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw an interview recently with Lauren Greenfield about her latest film, and she talked about how her philosophy, and this might have come from you, Kate, in the film, is to, in the first 5 minutes, basically is a compressed version of the entire film. You should know who all the people are. You should get it. And then the film, basically is laid out that way. And I just wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, if that is something you agree with or not.
In this film, we had the hard time finding the opening, and that might be part of what she's referring to, because in the end, we cut an opening sort of montage scene that tells you that this is about many characters, it's about an illness, and it's about an institution. We didn't specifically identify all the main characters. In fact, some of the main characters weren't even in the opening scene. But it was something that gave you as much, I think, all the information that you needed to know what the journey was on, that you were going to about to embark on. So.
But it's an interesting question that you asked, because it kind of speaks also to a kind of TV opening too, right? We spoke about that last night.
Yeah, I don't feel it's necessary to introduce every character. I think it is important to introduce the story, or what you're about to, what the ride is that you're about to take. Yeah, but I'm not one of those that needs to have every character have a soundbite, or I don't think you need to do that. I think you need to create that, and it's one of the things I love to do, is to cut an opening, and sometimes it's the first thing I do. It might not end up being the opening of the film, but to me it's a challenge to myself to sort of tell myself, well, like, what's the topic sentence, and what's the feeling that I want the audience to get also. So it's story, and it's also emotion, and to set some sort of expectation.
I think, I know there's hand signals going around, but we also had to start 5 minutes late, so I'd like to lobby for another 5 minutes. Thank you. Yeah.
One of my question is that what is the most important thing, like as a whole documentary? Like, is it the content, the story? Is it composition? Is it the soundbite, or the music, or whatever? But I'm sure you guys have seen 38 trillion documentaries in your lives. So is there like a common denominator that you see, like what hits you right away? Like what do you know when you see a documentary, like this is gonna be good? Or I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I think character is pretty important. I'm usually most engaged in films that have characters that I care about, that I'm interested, that I want to know more about their lives. What do you think?
It's your show.
Oh.
They want to hear from you.
Well, I do think characters is what I look for. And emotion. Also, when I watch dailies, I'm always, checking what I respond to, what makes me laugh, what makes me cry, which characters are engaging and draw me in. But I guess I would say that's the most important.
We were talking
Casting.
last night about story and about, all those things that I'm sure has been spoken a lot about in terms of the dramas today, good old-fashioned beginning, middle, and end, and people who change in front of you, right? Or because you have a great editor. It's collapsed, so you can see that change, yeah? Casting, what did you mean by that?
Exactly that. Like I said, in both these films, there were more characters originally interviewed and followed, and in the end, there was Into the Arms of Strangers, there was one woman who we felt like she had told the story so many times, and she had been on a speaking circuit and had written a book and had been interviewed many, many times, and as devastating as her story was, there was a distance from her that nobody responded to her the way we did to the other people that were interviewed. And in the end, she didn't make it into the. I tried it, just so that she could be in once or twice, and it just felt false every time. We felt terrible about that.
Maybe that's vulnerability too, eh? Like when people are vulnerable in front of the camera, when you can see the cracks.
That's true.
Then everybody leans into the frame. When somebody's presenting their kind of PR image, you lean back.
Absolutely.
Yeah? So maybe that's the key to casting.
Honesty, openness, vulnerability.
Yeah. Being open to that.
Yes. I mean, I admire anybody that agrees to be in a documentary, frankly. I don't think I would ever do it.
You're in one right now. There was some other, we have to be quick, so I'm just going to fire them out.
It's I guess a two-part question to both of you, actually. One is you kind of opened it with the importance of having a good editor, and me as a documentary filmmaker who's also who cuts my own films. I'm actually working on my first feature documentary now. I'm contemplating working with an editor, but the material I'm working with, though, I'm so close to, and I can see that as being a disadvantage, but also it's required 2 or 3 years of research, and it's on music, and I'm a musician, so I know it very well what we're talking about. And also it's in several different languages which I speak, and so it would just be I could see the advantage of working with an editor, but it also would present challenges.
What's the question?
Just what my question is what your thoughts are on that, and when is it?
When do you need an editor?
When do you?
Or
when
why?
do you?
Why do we need you?
You tell me.
No. From your end of the binoculars.
Well, I think the key is saying that you were so close to it, that an editor could help you, maybe gain some distance on it. And, the language, that's always an issue, but if there are editors who, I mean, I've cut many films in many, many different languages, and there are ways around that with transcripts and translations and so forth. But I think, you know, find someone that you trust and that's interested in the subject, and you can watch the footage together, which I love doing, is watching the dailies with the director, and then, you know, talk about it and brainstorm. But, you know, you might be surprised what happens.
I think the idea, it really is coming from a perspective of somebody who's had the privilege of working with editors. My sense is it really is a case of 1 + 1 = 3. And that sense of it's not about giving up at all. It's about being being able to walk out of a room and hear, what used to be hear the steam back, hear the people working, and then come back in 2 or 3 days and be able to have that little bit of distance. And then the two of you start really cracking what's actually in the footage, not the story behind how hard it was to get or how important it is. And that really helps me when I'm up to here in the importance of it all. When I have an editor going, that character's not speaking to me, eh? It's like gold.
I think that's a great way to end.
I've got a hunch that we're just warming up. So we'll move out into the lobby, and if people would like to talk to Kate more, I really encourage you to do that, if that's all right. If you don't mind being ambushed. And I'd like to thank the festival for setting this up and allowing us to have this chat, and for all of you coming. Thank you so much.